This is a 5.5-hour flight. Don't nobody say one word to me. Not one word. Just having conversations and doing all kinds of things, saying nothing to me. And as soon as I walked out of there, I went in the bathroom and I threw up. And just laid on the floor for like 30 minutes. His mama came in there and cleaned me up.
Snoop Dogg wasn't just a witness to hip-hop's darkest era. He was allegedly a key player. And the proof might be hiding in a pager message no one was supposed to see. In 2022, Jaguar Wright, the singer-turned-industry whistleblower with nothing left to lose, went public with a claim that threw gasoline on a decades-old fire. According to her, Snoop knew Shakur and Christopher Wallace, better known as Biggie Smalls, were marked men long before the bullets flew. She didn't hesitate. She didn't hedge. Her exact words were, "Everyone knew Diddy was the devil. He's been the devil for 30 years. And she wasn't just naming names. She was pointing fingers at alliances that had been overlooked, suggesting that behind every beef was a puppet master. And behind the puppet master was someone we trusted. That someone, she claimed, was Snoop.
So I consider my rap as a conversation more or less than a rap, because if you take the music off and just listen to my words, it's like I'm conversating with you rather than screaming and hollering over the music.
Now, on its face, it sounds like another conspiracy theory clawing its way out of hip-hop's basement. But here's where things get uncomfortable, because it doesn't just stop at rumors. It lines up with a timeline. It bleeds into real interviews, backstage betrayals, and a pager nobody ever expected to matter. And when we go back to 1996, we find Snoop on LA radio, just days before Shakur's drive-by tragedy in Las Vegas, talking about how much love he had for Bad Boy Records, the same crew Shakur had publicly declared war on. That wasn't just poor timing, it was something closer to treason. Snoop wasn't just Shakur's label mate. He wasn't just a collaborator. He called Shakur his brother. But that broadcast didn't sound like brotherhood. It sounded like the opposite. And we're not the only ones who noticed. Napoleon, a member of Shakur's group, The Outlaws, didn't mince words either. He later accused Snoop of being jealous of Shakur's rise, of waiting until Shakur was gone to start rewriting history. In his words, Snoop tried to dim his light. And here's where things really twist, because in early 2025, Suge Knight came out from behind bars with a podcast. And on that mic, he didn't dodge. He said Snoop had a lot of explaining to do when it came to Shakur's end.
I say a week before he died, we was best of friends. 2 days before he died, I don't think he liked me.
The question is, what does Snoop need to explain? Here's where it gets damning. According to accounts from both the All Eyes on Me biopic and insiders familiar with the timeline, right after that infamous radio interview, Snoop boarded a private plane with both Shakur and Suge. Tensions were high, cold-shouldered energy, the kind of silence you could measure in threats. And Snoop, by his own admission, felt the pressure. The film portrays him as hiding a blade up his sleeve. Let's be clear, this wasn't just an entourage scuffle. This was the tail end of a coast-to-coast war, with million-dollar egos, labels, and lives on the line. If you need a weapon to sit next to your so-called brother, then either you're not telling the truth about the friendship, or you know something they don't. Then came the hospital scene. After Shakur was shot in Vegas, Snoop rushed to the hospital to see him. What happened next isn't folklore, it's firsthand. Snoop fainted. Shakur collapsed at the sight of his friend, riddled with tubes and barely hanging on, and standing next to the bed, Shakur's mother, Afeni Shakur. She told Snoop to get it together, told him to fix himself up and say goodbye to her son like a man, and he did. But there's a crack in the emotion. Because if this was pure grief, then why did Suge, years later, hint that Snoop already knew what was coming? Why did Jaguar say he was reading a pager before anyone else had answers? And why would a man so devastated by the loss of his friend have needed a weapon on that plane in the first place?
And I just get right on the side of his head and just start talking to him in his ear. Just talking to him.
That pager message, still unverified but whispered about in multiple circles, has become the centerpiece of a growing theory that Snoop wasn't just a bystander. He was a buffer. That he was already aligned with Diddy, already signaling his shift away from the crumbling death row empire and into Bad Boy's orbit, and the timeline backs it up. After Shakur's funeral, Snoop went quiet on the East Coast beef. He pivoted. He started showing up in friendlier places, farther from Suge and closer to corporate safety. To some, it looked like survival. To others, it looked like betrayal. But here's where the pattern gets darker. Because Snoop's relationship with Diddy isn't new. It didn't start in recent years. Jaguar Wright claims it goes back decades. That Snoop has always been under Diddy's thumb, a compliant player in a much larger game. Her words painted Snoop not as the laid-back dogfather, but as the industry's longest-running sidekick. A polished front for one of the music world's most notorious power brokers. And if that's true, if the loyalty really was to Diddy all along, then every move Snoop made at death row deserves to be re-examined.
And this is the flight where Diddy said to her,
showed her
she
the video,
testified
showed her the
that
freak-off video.
he showed her a video of a freak-off that she participated in and said, if you don't participate in another freak-off when we get to New York, I'm going to put this video out. I'm going to send it to your mother.
And that's coercion.
She testified
if it's true.
to that.
If the jury
if they believed her,
yeah.
That's coercion.
That's
they would have.
There's also the fact that when Diddy's legal storm hit, we're talking racketeering, trafficking, transportation across state lines for illicit encounters. Some of the same names and same behaviors echoed eerily close to Snoop's own past affiliations. And while Snoop hasn't been formally charged in any of Diddy's ongoing federal cases, insiders have started to murmur about how frequently the two men's paths crossed, how many of the same parties they attended, and how aligned their careers were during hip-hop's most dangerous decade. Suge Knight's own history with Snoop is a roller coaster of loyalty, violence, and public jabs. But when Suge says, in the middle of Diddy's downfall, that he needs a real conversation with Snoop about what happened to Shakur, that's not nothing. That's not posturing. That's a red flag waving from behind prison bars. And remember, Suge was in the car when Shakur was hit. If anyone has been sitting on suppressed knowledge, it's him. The fact that his first instinct is to pivot the attention towards Snoop says plenty.
But that's why you get these type of individuals always kicking dirt on Pac name after they made their millions from doing these documentaries and stuff.
And then there's Napoleon again, doubling down years later. He claims Snoop didn't just distance himself from Shakur after the shooting, he sanitized the narrative. He said things in interviews that subtly undermined Shakur's legacy, claimed he didn't hit him up, Shakur's infamous diss record against Biggie and Bad Boy, even suggested he tried to talk Shakur out of his beefs. Napoleon said those were attempts to rewrite history, to soften Shakur's edge and elevate Snoop's own. Meanwhile, Alan Hughes, the director of Dear Mama, the Shakur and Afeni documentary, said Snoop dimmed his light so Shakur could shine. On its face, that sounds respectful, but dig an inch deeper and it starts to sound like someone who wanted that spotlight back. Someone who stepped aside not out of humility, but because they saw which way the wind was blowing and made sure they were on the right side when it stopped.
Like Snoop, for example, they have a way where they acting like they praising Pac, but they putting him down.
And Snoop did land on his feet. He left Death Row, joined Master P's No Limit, and rebranded with a vengeance. The gangster image softened, the Crip roots faded into comedy sketches and cooking shows. And maybe that was growth, or maybe it was strategy. Because as Diddy's empire started to rot from the inside, people began revisiting the men who stood quietly beside him all those years. Not the ones making headlines, but the ones blending into every room. The ones with just enough innocence to stay out of jail, but just enough power to never leave the table. And that's where we have to ask the hard question. If Diddy really was running a victim-making machine, as Jaguar Wright said, then who else had keys to the engine room? Who stood by while the machine turned? And who kept their hands just clean enough to walk away? Because if Snoop Dogg, the same man who fainted at Shakur's bedside, who threw up a peace sign while the war was still raging, was also the one reading the messages before they were public and shaking hands with both sides while the bullets were flying, then this isn't just about loyalty anymore. It's about complicity. And when you combine that with the implication that he knew Biggie's fate too, well, the pager starts to look less like a prop and more like a receipt.
It's probably leaning towards guilt. Now, on the racketeering, I agree with you that the predicate acts may be found, but that's not all they need. There's an ultimate question. The first question on the jury verdict form is, do you find him guilty or not guilty of racketeering? Before you even get to the predicate acts, which you only get to if you find guilt, they could just be hung up on that question and say, this guy's not Tony Soprano. I am not convinced that I even want to find guilt on the act.
Especially now that Suge, from behind that prison phone, is drawing a direct line from Snoop's actions to Shakur's ending. Not a vague suggestion, not a throwaway comment. He said flatly that Snoop's got a lot of explaining to do. And when someone like Suge says that, a man with nothing left to lose, no incentive to hold back, it forces everyone else to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about that plane ride, that hospital visit, and that radio interview. Because that's the thread, the one that connects the brotherhood to the betrayal, the public grief to the private panic, the devotion to the pager, and it keeps going. Who survived both sides of the war without a scratch? Who's still on stage today, selling nostalgia like it's lemonade on a hot day, while the people who built the culture with him are either gone, locked up, or silent? And now we're full circle. Suge says Snoop has explaining to do. Jaguar says Snoop was in the room. The feds say the patterns match. And we're left staring at that pager, at a message that allegedly came before Shakur's pulse faded, before Biggie's car window shattered, before the industry buried the truth under platinum plaques and public denials.
The turmoil and the stuff that I put her through in my journey on becoming successful, because I had no understanding of what I was doing to her, how I was hurting her.
If the pager message was real, And if Snoop read it before Shakur was even in the hospital, then we have to ask, was it a warning or was it a confirmation that the fix was in? But let's throw it back to you. After everything we've unpacked, who do you think was really behind the silence that followed Shakur's last breath? Was Snoop Dogg a survivor caught in the crossfire? Or a quiet architect standing in the shadow? Drop your theories in the comments. We're watching, we're listening, and trust us, the next chapter might blow this wide open. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, and until next time, don't believe everything you hear unless you hear it here.